Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, the author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash, Hilliard MacBeth, believes Vancouver's housing bubble has burst and homes now worth over $1 million could drop into the $500,000 range. Ted Dixon, the CEO and co-founder of IncResearch.ca, Canada's first online financial news and research service, takes a look at measures that could turn BC into a true booming high-tech economic giant. The changes include how BC Hydro, TransLink, and ICBC are organized. We'll talk to Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond-producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109-carat diamond, recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior, with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
We're talking with Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to This Week in Money, Hilliard.
Nice to be back on the show.
People are taking a look at Vancouver real estate values dropping 25% in the last month or so. Of course, they're blaming the 15% foreign investment tax on domestic real estate. But is that really a factor, and should Vancouver homeowners be worried about their equity?
Well, the thing, the interesting thing about the dropping, I was talking to somebody from Vancouver just a couple of days ago, and I said, what we really need is an index of asking prices, so listing prices, because that's what's dropped so far, the actual transaction prices, because there's been so few transactions at the higher end of the market. The index is based on the actual transactions, and of course there's two. There's the CREA, and then there's the Terranet National Bank Index. And they calculate a different way, each one, but eventually they kind of come together. And but you think about it, if the foreign bid was really important in the $2 or $3 million houses, and the local people are buying the $500,000 and $600,000 condos, let's say, and all the transactions are in condos, and there's almost no transactions in single-family homes, which apparently is what's happening right now. Did the price of those single-family homes actually drop by that much? Did it go from 1.5 million down to 500,000? No, it's a different mix. So the type of home should be standardized when you look at how much it's dropped. So we won't really know until people start buying those $2 and $3 million homes if they've actually dropped, down to 1 million from 3 million, or whether it's just a lull in the activity. So it's a little too soon to say that prices have dropped. But if you base it on what's actually transacted, there is a drop, and the bigger thing is the lack of activity. I mean, the numbers are, this is the biggest drop in activity that anybody's ever seen for probably 30 years, like going from 60 sales a month down to 5 or 10 sales a month. I mean, that's just unheard of, that kind of a change. And some of it must be due to the foreign tax, but, there might also be a lot of speculators in there. So if the speculators are expecting people to come from China to buy the house, and they were buying on that basis, and now they think, oh, maybe that's going to disappear, then they might just not be willing to try and buy that house so they could flip it in 3 months from now. So it's a very complicated topic, but the tax might be one part of it, but I think the bigger thing for Vancouver real estate, and actually for all of Canada, is the discovery, the shocking discovery, that CRA was not making sure that the taxes were collected. Because I talked to somebody just a few days ago who said that her husband had been paying taxes on real estate transactions for the last 30 years, and she's really, really upset. She's saying, CRA, you're not getting any more money from us until you start collecting money from all the people that have been transacting real estate transactions. So that's a really big deal.
Well, I also found out, too, they're supposed to fill out a financial tracking form, a FinTrack, for every real estate transaction, but national authorities have only asked for a handful of them over the past decade. So whether you fill it in or don't, nobody knows.
Well, it works a little bit differently. I mean, I'm assuming it works the same in real estate as it does in the financial services, which I've been in for 38 years now. If we see any transaction that is suspicious, we're required to report it. And there's actually a threat of a jail sentence if you don't. So it's pretty serious stuff. And a suspicious transaction, there's a whole long list of things that would be suspicious. For instance, one of them is if the person is a politically connected person. If you find out that somebody has been connected to the government in a foreign country, you have to report that, because that becomes a special thing. There was a lawyer interviewed on one of the media outlets from Vancouver who's an expert in this area, and she mentioned that one. But there's a whole long list of if you have any trouble, if you as the agent have any trouble at all determining who is the actual owner, or who are the actual people that are putting up the money, or if there's any kind of vagueness about the citizenship or the residency of the buyer, then you're required to report that. So the form, is sort of it's sort of on the honor of the real estate agent or the notary public or the bank or the financial services advisor or any of those people. It's on them to notice these things and then report them. So when a couple of years ago, I asked a realtor in Vancouver about that, and she said, "Oh, we couldn't track that." She said, if we tried to track where the money was actually coming from or the actual citizenship of some of these people, we would never. Half the transactions would fall through, so they were just ignoring it. And so, I mean, this is a big, big deal. Between the CRA and FinTrack, they're two separate things. That alone could be enough to put a real chill on the Vancouver market, and probably more in the Vancouver market than, say, Edmonton or Calgary. But it could also be a problem in the Toronto market, probably Vancouver and Toronto being the biggest destinations for people who might be trying to move money from Iran or someplace like that to Canada, viewing Canada as a safe place to hide the money for a while, and real estate's the best place to hide it. It's really hard to put the money in a bank account. There's much closer scrutiny to a bank account. It's much easier to buy properties and then sell them and then buy another property and then sell that one and buy another property. And that way the trail is kind of obscured and nobody can track where the money came from. And if somebody asks you, you just say, "Oh, no, I made the money in real estate." So the original origins of the money is lost. The other place is crime, like proceeds of crime, that people doing drugs and selling drugs and things like that, they have a real problem. They've got all this cash. How do they hide it? They can't report it. So real estate's perfect for that. So if it's true that real estate was being used by foreigners and people getting money from illegal things, corruption, whatever, then and if there's a crackdown, which I'm sure there will be, the political pressure is going to be enormous, both through CRA and through FinTrack. Then that's the whole thing. The whole game has changed. It's a completely different game now.
Well, BC's Finance Minister Mike DeYoung said he wished that the Canadian taxation people would look into these real estate sales. He said if you want to stop the illegal stuff, that's the way to do it.
Well, and I think that what they're nervous about is the politicians. They're nervous about the exemption on, you get your profit, you get the profit gain that you make on selling a residence that you live in is tax free, and it's a self-reporting thing that almost nobody fills out. So, that would be simple. All you'd have to do is say, you have to be a taxpayer in Canada, and you have to have owned the property for, let's say, just pick a number, 5 years. And if you really wanted to make it fair, I think it would be fair to say, and you have a lifetime maximum limit of $850,000 or whatever, which is happens to be the limit on small business sales as well. And 99% of the people would never go above $850,000. So I think that would be politically acceptable. But the other thing that they could do is they could say on your tax return, if you buy a house in that calendar year, you have to submit that you bought the house, what price you paid for it, what the financing was, and put that on your tax return. And then the CRA would track that. And then when you sell it, the CRA would have the information about how much profit or loss was made on the sale. So it's a loophole so big you could drive a Mack truck through it. The basic principles of income taxation is all income should be taxed, but the residential real estate loophole exemption, I guess I shouldn't call it a loophole, I'll call it an exemption, was deliberately granted, and it kind of makes sense. But it was never designed for people that were going to be buying and selling multiple properties every year. There was never any intention of allowing that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do it on a national basis. I don't think it's just BC. I think if they're going to do something, the rules, of course, under CRA apply to all Canadians, not just people in BC.
You're listening to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. The Vancouver City Council will put a vacancy tax on homes starting next year. There's something like 10,000 vacant homes in Vancouver. The idea is to increase the amount of vacancy for rental units. Do you think a tax on vacant property will work?
It's hard to say. I've been reading about that, and I really don't know how complicated. That seems like it's going to be very complicated to administer. Of course, the house sitting business is going to skyrocket now. There's going to be lots of people offering their services as house sitters. But I guess in a way that accomplishes what people wanted. They wanted to get people into those houses, and I know in Edmonton, and this might be true in Vancouver too, I don't know, but there are houses that are for rent, and it seems like the bigger the house, the more luxurious it is, the better the bargain is in terms of the rent. So if you can find a couple other people to rent a very large house, say 4,000 square feet or something, you get it for $3,000 a month, all of a sudden you've got a beautiful house and you've got a bargain. So I don't know how that would work. I think it'll probably mean that some people might be induced to sell rather than be sitting on it and go through all the hassle of having somebody else living there. Because certainly, especially if it's an expensive property, renting is probably not ideal for maintaining the value of that property. It's probably best to just sell it. So, but it does bring up the question about, is it really supply that is the problem? Because people in Vancouver especially have made the argument that it's a lack of supply that has caused the prices to go so high. But in reality, it might be the speculative demand, the excess demand coming from the foreign buyers and the speculators and all of the people that are playing the real estate market like it's trading stocks. We might find out that that's the cause of the rising prices. It's unlikely to be supply because, although there could be in specific markets, but overall in Canada, our housing construction is much, much higher than it normally is in the past. And it's also on a population-adjusted basis, it's much, much higher than the U.S. was. Even at the peak, it's a little bit higher than it was in the U.S. at their peak in 2006. And right now it's close to double what it is in the United States. So we've been building lots of properties, and unless we're building them in the wrong place and the wrong type, which is possible, there should be sufficient supply. And now I read that Grouse Mountain is going to be sold, so there'll be lots of room on Grouse Mountain to build all kinds of new properties.
Another figure that's come up is in the past month or two, commercial real estate sales in Vancouver up 30%. So if people are investing in real estate and they can't buy domestic residential, I guess they're going for commercial properties.
The commercial real estate traditionally when you have these downturns, if that's what we're getting into, is usually a bigger debacle than residential. And the reason is that owners of commercial properties are much more likely just to walk away and tell the bank, I give up, sue me kind of thing. Whereas people in homes tend to try and hang on to their homes it's much stickier. And in Alberta, we've got a tremendous excess supply of every kind of commercial, whether it be office towers or low-rise commercial. There's a huge tobacco looming here in commercial. So I wouldn't be surprised if the commercial thing actually turns out to be as bad or even worse than the housing thing when the bubble bursts, because there's some really big changes happening in the office market. That people are shopping online now. A lot of people can work from home. They don't have to go downtown to the office. I mean, the traffic I know in Vancouver can be horrendous. And if somebody can work from home, they get all their stuff set up. It's crazy to spend 2 hours a day sitting in traffic trying to get someplace. So there's a lot of work that can be done in those 2 hours that somebody would spend commuting to a downtown office location. Unfortunately for Edmonton and Calgary, and perhaps Vancouver too, the decisions made a couple of years ago to build brand new office towers, it's too late to stop them building. So they're going to come on stream here in the next year or two, and it's going to be a huge surplus of office space. Already in Calgary, there's something like 8 or 9 million square feet surplus, and there's another 3.5 million under construction, and similar ratio in Edmonton, although the numbers are smaller. But my opinion is it's a permanent change. I don't think the days of having 30 floors of office workers working away, working on their little projects. I think those days belong to the past. So it's going to be very interesting from that point of view as well, not just the residential.
Well, it's not impossible to turn those office towers into residential condos. They did it with the old BC Hydro office tower in downtown Vancouver.
Yeah, I asked somebody about that, and they said, well, it's tough because, first of all, there's a whole bunch of residential towers that are under construction in Toronto, Edmonton, Calgary, and probably Vancouver too. I don't know for sure, but so that would just be adding to the surplus. But the other thing is the construction is very different. Like an office building is built with no walls, and then people come in and they put in those temporary walls, and there's not that much soundproofing. But in the apartment construction, of course, the walls are built in right from the beginning. So with the soundproofing today has to be excellent. So it's a different kind of construction. It can be done. It's not impossible, but it's not ideal. It's not what you choose to do if you were starting. Better off to start from scratch and build the residential tower as it is. And there's a lot of brand new high-rise rental projects going up all across Canada. It seems like the condo thing is kind of slowing down a little bit, and rental is the new thing to do now.
One of the charts produced by Garth Turner, thegreaterfool.ca, was he was saying the $1.4 million house in Vancouver could drop into the 500,000s worth of value. Is that possible, or is that likely?
Well, it's interesting. Even just asking the question, is it possible, sort of, you go, well, that's like a 66% drop. However, if you look at the charts of the prices in Vancouver and you go back a few years, that would only take us back probably 15 years to 2001 or 2002 or something like that. So prior to that time, that was the going rate for houses, and the current bubble only started to form around 2001, 2002. So all that would do would be to take the housing bubble back to the trend line that was in place before the bubble started. And according to some experts, Grantham being the number one in bubbles, every single bubble that he studied, 28 of them, they all corrected. Once they started to burst, they all corrected right back to the trend line that was in place before the bubble formed, which would indicate that Garth Turner is correct, that the $1.4 million house would go back to $500,000. And, that would bring it back into the affordable range for people. It would still be expensive, given that the average household income in Vancouver is only $65,000. But people, could stretch. But it's crazy to try and imagine what would happen to all those mortgages, and there'd be a very large number of defaults, obviously, and hopefully, if that were to happen in Canada, hopefully the authorities would not do what they did in the U.S., which was bail the banks out, but leave all the people to suffer the losses on a personal basis. But I don't know. It's going to be very difficult for governments to know what to do. I'm sure they're starting to think about it, although I don't imagine that they ever would contemplate something that drastic. I know in the recent past, the Bank of Canada and other authorities have been asked by the government to do a stress test, and I think they've modeled something like a 30% decline in housing. And everybody comes back and says, "Oh no, we'd be fine. We can handle 30% correction." But 30% on a $1.4 million house only gets it back to $1 million, and that only goes back a couple of years. It doesn't go back far at all. It doesn't retrace even half of the bubble that's formed. So if the bubble were to really burst and the correction would go all the way back to prior to the start of the bubble, then those kind of numbers is what would happen.
Hilliard, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
My guest is Ted Dixon, CEO and co-founder of InkResearch.ca, Canada's first online financial news and research service, providing insider news and knowledge to investors. Welcome to This Week in Money, Ted.
Oh, it's great to be here this week with you, Jim.
Today, you get to pretend that you're BC's premier for a day. Well, in fact, why not say for a whole year? Ted, I know you have a lot of things that you want to talk about. So perhaps maybe one of the biggest bugaboos in the Lower Mainland, TransLink, which nobody seems to trust with their money.
Well, look, basically, one of the nice things about being premier, I think, would be if I could get some of the pension benefits that come along with that. But seriously, no, I think that everyone who runs for office are going to be running for office come next spring, and let's hope that we really have some good policy debates out there, and we can move the province forward with some really on the edge and bold initiatives that really help BC stand out. So what I've sort of put together, and I think I would encourage both my former colleagues in the BC Liberal Party and also the NDP to kind of think about some of the ideas here, because I'm really trying to present them in a non-partisan way, and so what I'm calling this is a Plan Z, Jim, and what the first Z stands for is zero crown ownership in some key agencies, and what our government could do is take an organization starting, let's say, with TransLink. So let's start relatively small, because TransLink, while it's a big influence on everyone's life in the Lower Mainland, of course, people outside of the Lower Mainland aren't impacted by it. But if you look at TransLink, it's just under a $2 billion a year budget, and it does have a lot of moving parts. and it's been subject to a lot of criticism, and I would say rightly earned criticism over the past number of years. And they went to try and get more money from the people, and it was turned down. I mean, I thought that was a very astute move by the Premier to throw the ball back to those who want to spend more money, to say, okay, you want to spend more money, you go get the people behind you. And the answer was no. And the reason why the answer was no is because governance at TransLink, to put it mildly, it sucks. We have a model that is undemocratic. These are appointed directors. No one knows who they are except for the organizations that are involved with appointing them. They're not really accountable to anyone. I know there's some good people on there, but the fact of the matter is that the governance model at TransLink is broken because it's not really responsible to anyone. So how do you fix it? Well, what I'm suggesting is we take a credit union, a modified credit union approach. That basically you turn over the ownership and the operation to those who actually pay the bills for TransLink. And what does that mean? That means you give people who use the service and fund the service, because those are two very overlapping but distinct groups, you give them a vote on who gets to run the show. And what you would end up doing is you would end up giving transit users about half the votes. So everyone who gets on the SkyTrain and the buses would get a say. And you would also have the taxpayers who help fund the system have a vote. And so it's roughly 50-50 in terms of the split, in terms of paying into the program, into the agency. And what you could do is you could start with TransLink monthly pass holders. When you buy a monthly pass, you get to register as a member of the TransLink community, and you would get a vote on who becomes a director. Same with the local municipalities who have property taxes that go into TransLink. They would get votes, and how they use it. They could either vote at council, or they could give the votes out to the homeowners. That would be up to and property owners and businesses who pay the taxes. That would be up to the local councils to decide how they're going to use their votes. And of course, the province collects fuel tax. So the province could still have a massive say in TransLink, and they would probably have a controlling say if they kept all the votes that would be associated with the fuel tax, or they could find a way to allow motorists who pay into the tax to have votes in terms of who goes on the board. So all of a sudden you would have TransLink would be accountable to the users and the funders, and I'm betting that would rapidly change the focus to user service and service delivery. People would then, and the organization would then be, fearful of wasting millions and millions and millions of dollars on card systems that don't work. And it would be a real revival in the governance energy at the company, and I think you would have a real improvement in terms of not only how the money is spent, but also the experience on TransLink as well.
Put some accountability into it.
Direct accountability, and that's the key. Our whole system, our whole representative system was developed, it was developed centuries ago, before we had the internet. You wouldn't be able to have a direct ownership, or I want to say governance as opposed to ownership, but a direct governance link between the users and the operators of TransLink, 100 years ago. But now, if you're a TransLink user and you want to register as a member of TransLink to have a vote, you can do that. You could all be internet enabled, so you go on the website and register, and you can download all the background documents. You don't have to mail them out. You don't have to go down that road. You just say everything is going to be online, and that would be very, very efficient, and it would allow people to participate and they would have a lot more confidence in how their money is spent because they would see how their money is spent, and they would be able to have a mechanism to voice their anger if it was being spent wrongly. And it's a big win for the provincial government because they don't have to take the flak. The flak goes directly to the organization.
Well, this whole thing about people voting on whether they wanted to pay 0.5% more in sales tax to support transit, how about the province let people vote on all major financial measures? How about that?
Well, that gets to the second part of my plan, Zed. There's 3 parts to it. But before we move there, I just want to say that once we would do the membership governance reform of TransLink, once that's working and people are happy with it, okay, because you have to do things incrementally when you're a government. You can't, if you come in and you try and do too much with and the public's not with you, you're going to get turfed, and rightly so. People want to see that what you're doing is working and that it's well intentioned and that you have the interests of society at heart. So you start with TransLink, and I think that would be a big success, and then you move to ICBC. This is another relic of the 70s. I think there's lots of room for improvement in terms of administrative overcosts and the way the organization is run. So why not have the people who pay the car insurance run the not run the organization, but have a say in how that organization is governed, instead of having this indirect accountability via the provincial government. These politicians are very busy. They have lots going on. Their constituents, they have issues at their constituent level. Then they have larger picture issues. Then it comes down to overseeing these agencies like ICBC. These agencies are so specialized that to expect a politician to provide the type of oversight that's really needed for the whole province, I think is now a misplaced assumption and a misplaced way of doing business. So I think that you want to look at doing sort of a credit union co-op model with ICBC once you successfully do and there'll be some bumps along the road and you fix it, but you keep the people with you and you keep the feedback loop going. And in government, if you can keep your eye on the voter and your eye on how you're doing with the most of the voters, you'll never make everyone happy. Well, then you're off to the races. Now, once you do TransLink, and then once you do ICBC, then you go for the big one, and the big one is BC Hydro. And again, you're going to have to do a credit union model. You're going to have to say, look, we're going to be giving a say in not in the management, but the selection of management, which is board level. You're going to get a say in who goes on the board if you're a ratepayer, and which is just about everyone. And you do that in stages, and you would begin to give people more of a direct say in BC Hydro. And it's very important that BC Hydro get off the books, that the taxpayer has zero liability to BC Hydro, which right now is a Crown corporation, so technically you could argue it doesn't really have the liability, but I think it does. And you want to get that into the hands of private investors and users of the service, because some of the projects, such as Site C, are very risky, and you don't want the taxpayer on the hook for that. And you want to have people who are willing to take that risk to be involved with those projects. So eventually you want to move down to be able to get more direct accountability to BC Hydro, and you want to be able to bring more investors into BC Hydro who really want to be involved with the utility space and get that risk off the back of the taxpayer.
Well, one of the problems with BC Hydro is the name. They only look at hydro development for power. What about wind? What about solar? What about BC's powerful tides? Because of Vancouver Island, we have variable tides all along the coast, so it wouldn't be just one big power surge and then nothing. It could be continuous power. All those things are being ignored right now.
Everything, or in terms of growth in that organization, if not everything, 90% effectively or more is going into Site C. one could quibble, was it 90%, is it 80%, is it 50%? Look, the big risk to BC Hydro going forward is something goes wrong with Site C, and not just the construction of the project, which, you know, we have very good engineers and project managers, I'm sure at BC Hydro are very competent, but there are forces beyond BC Hydro's control that could shake up the economics of the project. You know, whether you're talking about a decrease in solar generation costs. Well, what if that happens? And, you know, all of a sudden in North America, you have a massive build-out of solar hydroelectricity, and electricity costs start to plummet around North America. You know, you've got a built-in rate structure that's going to support Site C. Well, what if that's not possible? So you really need to get this risk off the taxpayers' back.
Also, I mean, with solar, Alberta is probably one of the sunniest places on the planet. If they decided to go solar, they wouldn't need any Site C power, would they?
Well, that's right. And, you know, you've got, but you've also got the reality that if we're going to be a competitive, jurisdiction for business, you know, we have to compete with the hydro rates, not only in Alberta, but Washington State, California, Texas. We have to be competitive across the board. So we cannot assume that we are immune to technological enhancements that happen in other jurisdictions and around the world. We are not. You know, we're going to have to go with that. So, you know, I can't stress the importance of being able to get BC Hydro into the hands of private investors so that they can shoulder the risk and also be responsible for good service delivery and good service quality, because, you know, when you're a private investor, you don't make money by losing customers. You know, so you've got to be able to keep your customers happy. So if it's done right, you would be able to get BC Hydro off the books of the BC government, get some money into the coffers, because it is a very valuable asset, but it has to be done right. And, you know, I know the socialists out there, you know, they're gonna, you know, they're just going to be crying blue murder when you suggest, well, BC Hydro shouldn't be part of the government anymore. But, you know, we really have to face reality here that why should we be, as taxpayers, in making these huge business risk decisions when, in fact, there are others who are willing to take those risks and deliver us probably a better service and a better product. And so we're going to need some bold action there, but you're going to need a track record that you can do it right, and people are going to have confidence that you can change the ownership and governance structure of BC Hydro, and you do that by starting small. You start with TransLink, you move up to ICBC, and then you get those right, and you say, now we're going to do BC Hydro.
BC income tax, how high should that rate be?
Well, that's the other key plank of Plan Z. And what the BC government can do is, in the next election, you know, if you're running as a BC Liberal or you're running as a New Democrat, you could run on a platform and say, we're going to work to come up with a tax reform package that delivers zero personal income tax rate to British Columbians. And as you do that, and you put it together, and you say, look, we're going to do a complete tax overhaul, but the foundation of that is going to be zero personal income tax rate. And then you can address all the problems that we have with the provincial sales tax. You know, business is very disappointed about the GST was, in most businesses, not all, depending on what side of the GST ledger you're on, but there was a lot of disappointment that we didn't adopt the GST. Well, now that there will be a chance to revisit that, but it has to be packaged with the overall citizen in mind first. There's no point in going to the people and saying, look, you know, we have to bring back this HST and you know, that's just a non-starter. You put the people first and you say, look, let's take a look at this tax system, and the primary goal is to stop taxing people for going to work. Like, why do we tax? I mean, it's hard enough getting up and going to work every day. You don't need to be taxed to do it. You're just discouraging people even more from going to work. Now, like, I don't want to sugarcoat this. If you're going to have zero personal income tax, you're going to have to make some other big decisions. But there's plenty to look at. You've got film tax credits that are worth basically hundreds of millions of dollars, along with the digital tax credit. Jim, so, why is your job in radio worth less than someone who's doing a TV documentary? Because that's what Victoria is basically saying. Jim Goddard's job as a radio producer is not as valuable to society as a television documentary producer. Well, that's just nuts, and it's misplaced. Who is Victoria to say, which jobs are more valuable? Why is a software developer who's working on a video game, and video games are great, but why is that developer more valuable to society and deserves a special tax credit than a software developer that's working on a life-saving medical device? But this is the tax regime we have, and it's very expensive. So if you got rid of those, for example, those tax credits, and you started treating every worker equally by getting rid of personal income tax, you would have a more equitable society. And, and I shout that out to the NDP, who, continue to lose elections because they're stuck in this 1970s big government activist mindset where, you need to have big government to affect change. Well, I'm sorry, it's people who affect change, and until the left wing of the province get their heads around that and start looking at ways to empower individuals as opposed to empowering governments, they're going to have a very hard time getting elected. And so that's my free piece. My free piece of advice to the NDP is, if they ever want to really be taken seriously and in terms of the mainstream of the voters, they're going to have to look at ways that show that they're empowering people, not empowering governments.
Going into the last election, the leader of the NDP, Adrian Dix, held hundreds of meetings with business leaders, which I thought was a great idea. And then, as soon as the election was called, Carol James holds a news conference where they roll out their usual Eat the Rich regimen, which is chase away business and blame rich people for every problem in the world.
And their big growth strategy was to further distort the tax system by giving even more money to the film industry, and which was, it's just ridiculous because, first of all, they were already given a huge subsidy. But again, why should that group be given more of a chance to make it than anyone else? And, okay, you can there are arguments for that, and I'm well familiar with them. But look, these tax breaks have been in place now for many, many years, if not decades. It's time that these industries run on their own. You can say, look, this has been great. You've had this, you've had this boost to help build your businesses. But look, it's time to start phasing it out. You don't have to do it overnight. You can phase it out over X number of years. You put it into a package and you say, okay, we're going to start phasing this out. And guess what? As we phase that out, we're going to phase out personal income tax on the provincial level. And you have to put this all in a package for people to vote on. You can't just sort of have meetings and, yes, it's great to consult, but, when you have these consultations, these vested interests that actually get to the meetings and put the briefs together, because it costs money and it takes time to do all this, you have to go to the people. And so you've got to look at these tax credits. You have to also look at, you can probably still cut spending in different areas, and I don't want to overemphasize that. There's always the mantra that government wastes money. It's true, they do, but you're not going to be able to find enough waste in government to eliminate personal income tax. You'll be able to find a bit to help you out, but the real hard decisions are do we continue to subsidize certain businesses through tax credits? And, do we continue to have a property tax environment where, residential rates are lower than business rates? Are homeowners paying what they should? These are all the tough questions that would come with an attempt to get rid of the tax on work. And you have to put it in a package and people can say yes or no. And, I think that there's no there's no real political downside. If you do put up a package together, it can be bipartisan. It doesn't have to be a partisan move. You can try and get both the BC Liberals and the NDP to agree on it. It may not be possible, but you have the discipline in this whole process that it's not going to happen unless the people say yes at the end of the day.
What's the best way to attract more high tech to BC?
Well, this is the big, I guess I don't call it the big idea in the Plan Z. It would be to develop basically a secure BC internet structure that protects, first of all, you'd be looking at businesses from outside threats and cyber attacks and basic malfeasance that goes on in the internet globally. And so how I want to characterize this is if you're if you're a company that operates primarily on the internet like we do at Inc. Research, if you get hacked, okay, you can't phone 911 and say, my website's been hacked, or I'm under a denial of service attack. Okay. But if you're being broken into, if your office is being broken into, you can phone 911 and say I'm being broken into, and the police will come. But wait a minute, this is showing how our whole idea towards public safety is still grounded sort of in the 1950s thinking. And what really modern business needs is some role of government and the police to protect us from outside threats. Now, I'm not a big believer in government intervention in the economy, but one of the roles that the government is supposed to play is to provide a certain degree of public safety. And I know this is usually talked about in terms of terrorism these days, and it's just so overdone in terms of the discussion about terrorism, because the number of terrorist acts in Canada is really you can count them on your hands, and it's very small, but the number of cyber attacks every day is amazing. And this costs businesses a huge amount of money. So how do you do this? Well, government has to work with local industry and academia to build a secure internet structure that would be voluntary for businesses to join. But if it works, and you obviously there's always a risk that it won't, but you would have a standout environment for businesses and new businesses who could come, especially in the financial tech area, any area that involves handling money of people. I mean, these are the most vulnerable to global internet mafias who try and extort businesses, try and shut them down. Healthcare is at huge risk of these types of attacks because of people's personal information that's embedded in these systems. So you could develop a huge competitive advantage for BC business, BC healthcare, if you were able to come up with a network that was secure and that businesses would be attracted, because BC is a leader in network security, big network security. It's a big idea. I think it's one, though, that we have the expertise to do. No other jurisdiction is really doing it in terms of a commercial focus. Eventually, it would pay for itself either through fees that firms would pay to join, or you could sell the government stake in the business down the road to cover the costs, and eventually you could offer it to households as well. You have to start, though, with that sort of defense model that you're building defenses for business, academia, and healthcare. You roll it out, and then eventually you could offer it to everyone. So. It's an area that is going to become more and more important. It's really not well understood by governments. It's when you think about cybercrime, you're still thinking about phishing, and people trying to get your personal information by sending you spoofed emails about how your bank account's being frozen and you better sign in here, and there's all these that's what you think about in terms of cyber financial crime, but it's a lot deeper than that, and it's very expensive, and it can take a business or a hospital offline.
Well, we've already seen hospitals held hostage and had to pay ransoms to get the internet system back up and their privacy of their patients protected.
Absolutely. So there's still this thinking that you organize businesses by their geography, but not with their networks. You don't organize your businesses are in the cloud. They're in the universe of the whole internet. And what we're looking to do here, and Plan Z would be to have zero threats, zero cyber threats. Are you going to get to zero? No, you're not. But if you can get to a relatively small, almost insignificant chance of your business being shut down or your hospital being basically frozen by a cyber attack, you're going to have people who want to buy into your system, and you're going to have a very attractive environment for startups and a whole range of network-based companies that will be very interested in joining your network.
Ted, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
My guest has been Ted Dixon, CEO and co-founder of InkResearch.ca. I'd like to thank our guests, Hilliard MacBeth and Ted Dixon, and thank you for listening. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of How Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen.